as it learned, it was able to sort of take that information, improve itself, and each iteration, whether a new model came out or what have you, would then be training the next model. So we reached a point of self-reinforcement. Each model was basically making the next model better. So now you didn't need to have $1 billion infrastructure. You could get away with it, if you believe what the DeepSeek guys are saying, $5 million to create the best model in the world. Edge-style AI, or AI infused into things. This idea of the Internet of Things now means that your lamppost and the streetlights can have the intelligence directly embedded in the device itself, rather than having to communicate with some far-flung cloud infrastructure hundreds or thousands of miles away. Last weekend, I built a quantum computing system. And when I say I should probably say my bots, with a little bit of insight and guidance from me, built a complete quantum computing system. And it's novel, and as far as I can tell, never been done. We're in this weird space where someone from their office and just outside of Toronto with basically no budget can invent these crazy complicated things that no one's ever tried and accomplished before on a Saturday afternoon in the midst of a snowstorm.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New Rules of the Game podcast, where we challenge the status quo and dive deep into how technology is reshaping everything, business, society, and even the very nature of reality. So my guest today is Reuven Cohen, also known as Reuv, a pioneer in AI and autonomous systems with over 3 decades of experience. Now, he specializes in agentic engineering, a cutting-edge approach to building intelligent, self-directed software that can think, adapt, and act on its own. One of his projects was the 2023 deployment of Ernst & Young's enterprise AI stack called EY.ai, used by more than 400,000 employees and 1.5 million end users with a budget of $1.4 billion. That's a big budget. Now, we're going to dive deep into what this all means, where AI is headed, and how agentic systems are shaping the industry. So welcome to the show, Reuv. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, Brad, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Well, the intro there is only just a small fraction of what you're up to. I mean, the intro could have gone on for almost the whole hour, right? Because you're into so many different things. I follow you on LinkedIn, and I just see your posts every single day, and they're long, lengthy, rich, full of content, and the work that you do behind them is unbelievable. So thanks for coming on the podcast today, for sharing that. For some folks, they're into AI a little bit. They understand it. Some folks are more advanced. Others are actually afraid of it, and they haven't done anything at all. I think you can share a lot of your knowledge and your experience and what you're up to at a pretty medium to deep level, and folks will, they'll hang on tight, and if they have to look things up, they will. Based on that, where would you like to start today?
Well, we should probably jump right into this current state of AI. I think that's what everybody probably wants to hear. It's a high velocity sort of sector, probably moving faster than most things we've seen in business and technology, possibly ever.
Yeah, that's a perfect place to start, is the state of the union today. And, and after we do that, we can talk about sort of what got us here and then where we're going next. And also, the question that keeps coming up from folks I talk to is, what the heck is an agentic engineer, right? So we've got, all sorts of fun to go over today.
Yeah, I think what we need to probably look at is the evolution, probably over the last 2.5 years in AI. And what really sort of kicked off the current sort of AI trend. And just to be clear, AI has been something that the technology field has been working on for close to 70 years. As soon as the first computers came out, there was this idea of AI and robots. And if you go back to the 1950s, a lot of the sort of popular culture focused on sort of the idea that AI was going to take your jobs, and it was going to, sort of take on a mind of its own. And so as soon as computers became literally a thing, people started to think about how we could make those computers think. Now, it wasn't really until 2017 when Google in particular came out with the idea of transformers and attention mechanisms that allowed these AI systems to predict and analyze what was happening in terms of the sentence and language constructs. So within these language models, you have this idea of a neural network and other sort of components that mimic the structure of a human mind. But it took, again, close to 60 years before that was even, viable as a concept. Now, fast forward a few years to 2022, November 2022, and with the launch of ChatGPT, suddenly you had this system that was not just capable, but it was capable in a way that mimicked and sort of sounded and acted a lot like a person. So previous to that, when you work with a chatbot, it was robotic. It didn't really have a lot of insight. It certainly didn't. It wasn't reflective at all, and it wasn't malleable. It kind of was procedural. It would do step 1, 2, and 3, and it might find credit card fraud or whatever specific thing it was looking for and do that quite well. But it wasn't able to adapt to you and the needs that you had, and that was the big change that ChatGPT in particular sort of really came out with their GPT models.
Well, that's interesting because you're right. You would ask those old systems questions and they might help you with like 2 or 3 exchanges, but after that they fall short and they want to hand you off to an agent pretty quickly, right? So was it their intention when they were building ChatGPT to get it to a point where it is today, or did it just evolve there and surprise them as well?
What we saw was sort of an exponential growth curve, and that was the first stage of that exponential growth curve. So when you look at 2017 and the sort of emergence of the transformer models and different sort of generative technologies, generative AI, and before that you had more of this concept of applied AI, machine learning. I'm finding patterns, I'm finding stats and being able to understand it. But generative AI was different in the sense that it suddenly had this ability to not just understand patterns, but to invent and to create and to reason and to have logic and other structures that up until that point were really limited to the domain of people, right? So all of a sudden you had these AI models that would essentially mimic the processes that we as individuals sort of bring when we think and when we act and when we do. And that was a kind of evolutionary leap in the capabilities of these systems. And when you look at sort of what's happened between November 2022 and February 2025, we've been going through a kind of exponential growth curve. Putting aside the massive billions or potentially trillions of dollars being spent, the rate in which this technology is evolving dwarfs things like Moore's Law, where we saw the compute capacity doubling every 18 months. Now we're seeing the capacity and capability of AI models doubling every 4 weeks, and probably less than that depending on which way you look at it. So we're seeing this growth that is almost unimaginable and practically unmeasurable in terms of capabilities.
Well, if that's the case, a couple of things would be happening. The hardware isn't getting any faster in 4 weeks. You might be building out a little bit more data center capacity or cloud capacity. But it sounds like if that's true, then it must be the software that's actually becoming much more intelligent about becoming intelligent.
Exactly. So what we saw in the early, and when I say early, I'm talking 2023 and 2024. Early in that cycle, we saw a lot of brute force. What that meant was you bring a ton of GPUs and compute capacity, network capacity, storage capacity, apply it, and you would be able to sort of grow and expand the capabilities just by sort of throwing more machines at it. Turns out that wasn't the optimal approach to scaling this. And what we saw late in 2024 was this approach that sort of was dominated with this idea of reinforcement. And you might have heard of things like DeepSeek as an example. So what happened was you were able to apply the technologies of the reinforcement. As it learned, it was able to sort of take that information, improve itself, and each iteration, whether a new model came out or what have you, would then be training the next model. So we reached a point of self-reinforcement. Each model was basically making the next model better. The biggest models were making the worst models equally or capable, right? So now you didn't need to have $1 billion infrastructure. You could get away with it, if you believe what the DeepSeek guys are saying, $5 million to create the best model in the world, where a month earlier, the O3 model, which was launched, cost estimated 100 million. So we're talking multiple sort of magnitudes less in terms of cost, but increased capability.
Well, that's interesting. And there's a lot of debate as to whether that's true. Was it that cost and was it really that effort involved? It's hard to tell. Now, you would understand this more than most. On the deep seek side, there's the ability, because it's you can download it. You can run a copy of it yourself. Is that right? Have you done that?
Mm-hmm. And I have no reason to believe it's not true. So the debate around whether it's true or not really comes down to whether or not they paid for their infrastructure for training. So let's just assume for a moment that they're using cloud infrastructure. There's a number of Chinese cloud infrastructure providers similar to AWS, but for China. And I think AWS actually might be in China. And now, so what people are arguing is, well, the cloud infrastructure of some sort needed to spend billions of dollars to facilitate an infrastructure to support them to be able to do it for $5 million. But that speaks to the fact that this capacity is available. Now, if you were to train a deep seek capable model today, based on the current technologies, and you want to be on par with DeepSeek from scratch, it wouldn't cost you $5 million. And this is a month later. It would likely cost you thousands of dollars. And that's because the models are open and capable of being replicated and used to train additional new models. So each incremental model that's released makes the subsequent models substantially more performant and substantially more economically feasible than the previous.
So where does this go? I mean, years ago there was a mainframe, because all the money went into one location and it was too complicated for normal people. And you tapped into that and it was shared, and then it was broken down into client server, and then it's PC, and then it's smartphone in your pocket. Where does this AI go then based on this?
One of the moves is probably away from monolithic, sort of centralized AI providers. And when I say monolithic, I mean having like a hyperscaler, the Microsofts and AWSs and Googles of the world, and sort of be the gatekeepers of the intelligence and capability. With each subsequent model getting more efficient, and more effective in terms of use of compute and GPU, you can now get basically the same general capability run on sort of consumer hardware, whether that's your laptop or a phone. And so what we're seeing is this move towards edge-style AI, or AI infused into things. This idea of the Internet of Things now means that your lamppost and the streetlights can have the intelligence directly embedded in the device itself, rather than having to communicate with some far-flung cloud infrastructure hundreds or thousands of miles away.
Wow. So distributed, edge-based, intelligent decision-making, smattered across the Internet of Things, basically.
Yeah, and now, because of these systems are able to act autonomously, you have this interesting opportunity to define, novel new forms of communication amongst these sort of semi or fully autonomous agents or agentics. So now we're reaching an inflection point where you might see, and I'm going to use a really sort of strange analogy, you might see a group of streetlights communicating with each other and optimizing each other in a way that doesn't involve any people, right? To reduce traffic jams, or a medical environment where you might need hyper-personalized medicine, where you might have the AI embedded directly into the heart monitoring systems or renal systems or other diagnostic systems that are tailored explicitly for your makeup, your genomic setup, or your medical profile or family history. That was never possible both because of limitations of the technology you built for the average day, the average traffic, or the average individual. Now you can build hyper-targeted things that solve specific problems in ways that weren't even possible a few months ago.
Well, that's interesting, because if the heart monitor or the traffic lights found a certain scenario and they learned and they adapted and they improved upon their algorithms, and then they shared it back to a central model, then the rest of the world's heart monitors and traffic signals could actually gain, benefit from that. So they sort of localize the intelligence and then share it distributed way.
And that's where this sort of reinforcement comes into play. When I was describing the fact that each subsequent model, which gets better, smarter, more capable, is enhancing every other model available. And that's this kind of reciprocal loop that we're seeing within AI. And the reason why we see this sort of exponential growth in capability is the fact that, folks like myself and others who are openly sharing the things that they're learning and how to do that literally creates the next generation of capable models and systems. So right now, if I want to create a new hyper-targeted model for some particular vertical use case, I literally can just set my agents and say, go build me the best possible version of that and try every possibility, and then let me know when the best possibility is discovered. And then I go to bed. I wake up in the morning and it's built some crazy application that I didn't think was possible. For example, last weekend I built a quantum computing system. And when I say I should probably say my bots, with a little bit of insight and guidance from me, built a complete quantum computing system. And it's novel, and as far as I can tell, never been done. We're in this weird space where someone from their office and just outside of Toronto with basically no budget can invent these crazy complicated things that no one's ever tried and accomplished before on a Saturday afternoon in the midst of a snowstorm.
And you're able to do that because there are resources available to you at minimal sort of monthly costs for you to spin those up and exercise those and take advantage of all this massive investment, not only in hardware and networking and connectivity and software and AI that's been made available to you. So this whole notion is like brand new, bleeding edge.
It is bleeding edge. And there's a few of us, and I freely admit I'm probably an outlier, maybe a leading indicator, whichever way you want to look at it, that is capable of creating at an astonishing rate. Last year I put out something close to 10 million lines of code. Now, just to put that in perspective, an average individual puts out somewhere between 6 and 12 lines of code per working day, right? So there's about 20 working days in a month. And, so if you look at it from that vantage point, if I was a highly productive developer, that would take me 33,000 years or so to develop. Yeah. I did that in less than 12 months. And that's just usable code. That doesn't include the probably hundreds of millions of lines of code that I tossed to get to the usable code. So when you look at like man hours or people hours, I guess you should probably say, the reality is we're in uncharted territory. We on one side of the spectrum, we have folks like myself that are capable of essentially building anything they can imagine and dream. The only limitation is literally my imagination or my imagination in partnership with ChatGPT or something, and I can just go build it or tell my bots to go build it. So in terms of certain levels of productivity, I'm 10,000 times more productive than your average, developer. That means that a team of 10,000 people is probably less productive than I am, which is pretty astonishing kind of stat, right?
Oh yeah, and boy, this brings up a couple of forks in the discussion. One of which is what happens to all those developers that you don't need because AI is developing for them. Before we go there, I would ask you, if you can sit down by yourself and have all your bots do all this work for you, how are you providing feedback to those that are building the underlying AI mechanisms so that next year you can even do 10,000 times more than that? How do you give them feedback in, thank you for helping me do all this, but I need to do more. This should be on your roadmap.
Well, first of all, the first month of the year, I did more code, several million lines of code, than I'd done in my entire previous 29 years of being a developer. Right? That's in the first month of 2025. So, and that if my current rate of sort of capability increases, I'll be in the probably 100 million lines of usable code this year, a 10x over last year. So, how do you actually grasp that much information, right? It's impossible for my mind to even understand or know every line of that code. Like I said, if 10 million lines of code takes you, 33,000 years, then 100 million takes you 300,000 years or some infinitely larger number. So, there's this sort of cognitive offload that we're dealing with. and this is not just applied to people like me who are building at an incredible rate. This is pretty much for anyone that's using AI, where the AI is both a cognitive enhancement. It allows me a kind of limitless opportunity, but it also is a crutch. It allows me to sort of offload some of the things I don't necessarily understand. I want to possibly understand. So depending on the way you look at it, we are either creating a generation of people who don't know and don't care and just offload it to the AI and let them figure it all out, which is dangerous in itself, cognitive offloading. And secondly, we're reaching an inflection point where people who do care and want to create are creating things beyond their own comprehension. I can't even tell you about how exactly my quantum system works, other than the fact that I see the results of it. It's performant. It's truly capable. But if you were to ask me specifically what is the inner workings of that quantum system and why does it give me such great results, I can attempt to explain it, but to be honest, it's generally beyond my comprehension.
Well, you could ask your system to explain it, and would it be able to summarize it?
It could explain it to me like I'm a 10-year-old. But the problem with the explain it to me like I'm a 10-year-old is I'm not actually getting an explanation. I'm getting this kind of filtered version of the explanation, which takes us back to the sort of cognitive offloading. Do I truly understand it if I'm explaining it being explained as a 10-year-old, or am I getting an analogy or some kind of summarization of it that doesn't actually truly explain the fundamentals of what it's doing?
It kind of feels like the cognitive offloading is inevitable, that as people rely more and more on AI automating and doing things for them, they don't have to do it anymore. They're not going to exercise those muscles anymore.
Well, that's the problem with the concepts of critical thought and freedom of thought in itself. When you're dependent on these types of systems to do the things that we used to do ourselves, there reaches a point where we need to question whether or not we're leading it or it's leading us. And that's the danger of the AI. This AI is capable to a point where, again, it's beyond our for most people's comprehension, and it's very capable of influencing the way that we think, the way that we operate, and the way that we work. And we need to have a balance between this idea of us leading it or it leading us.
Yeah, when you think about education these days, remember when you were back in school and you were in math and algebra and geometry and all those classes, there were kids in the class that really got it. They knew it well. They were done in halftime on the test, and others that just never really grokked it. So with AI, and devices that are ubiquitous, it seems like it's a level playing field now. Kind of whether you get it or not, you're going to get the answer, and you hopefully can apply the answer and make it useful and so forth. But it turns out the question you mentioned, is it a crutch, or now is it a benefit that democratizes everyone to a similar ability?
It depends. Some portion of the population will always be lazy. Unfortunately, not everybody is inspired or wants to, maximize their own potential for whatever reason, and that's fair. Human nature, right? Certain people are always going to be more, creative and inventive in the use and application of technology, where others just want to do the bare minimum to get by. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. Some people want a more simple lifestyle. That's great for them. The challenge that we have is a dichotomy between those who are empowered in a way that has never been possible throughout humanity, right? This idea of an infinite source of knowledge and a kind of an all-seeing, all-knowing oracle that answers any problem and can give me the probabilistic output and predict the future to a certain degree. If we had seen this 2,000 years ago, there likely would have been a religion formed around it, right? It's so revolutionary. But today we're like, whatever. We just passed the Turing test and no one even blinked an eye. And that's the interesting thing about our times is, that's probably going to lead to, a group of highly capable, highly skilled, practitioners of this technology that literally can do anything. And the other group that are struggling to live in a society where you have those types of people.
it brings you back to this point of, whether you're lazy or ambitious. Boy, you could be a young kid in college and be very ambitious and try to write as many lines of code as you could, but you just won't compete against this new world. And so, and then you have those that are lazy that might be like significantly farther behind. What is the impact in your mind on the jobs of, today as well as the future? And, when you think about it, it's going to be different. What sort of jobs are likely to go like that with AI coming in? And what are the other ones that are kind of AI proof?
Well, if we're going to have a frank discussion, I'd say anything involving any sort of analytics, anything involving any kind of bureaucracy, anything involving someone sitting in front of a computer is likely going to be replaced. And what does that actually mean? Well, if you look at the Western economies, that is the middle class for the most part, right? Those are people who go work in an office. Those are people who put information in, who need to do some form of analysis or consulting. Those are super easy to replace, especially the consultants, right? It's literally, ChatGPT is literally the ideal consultant. It'll answer any question in any form, in any vertical sort of area, and explain it to you in a way, hopefully, that makes sense to you. Explain it to me like I'm a 10-year-old. So that is a challenge. And if you look at some of the trends that are even happening as we speak, within the U.S. federal government, a lot of those, the changes that you're seeing in sort of, the bureaucracy of government is, eliminating waste, but that waste is actually probably the replacement of a lot of these sort of manual, laborious jobs with automated agentic systems that can do the analysis 24/7 at a rate that people just can't match. Which opens up the question to, when you start infusing this into business, into government, into other structures, what's the point of people in that process? Who has the oversight, and what's the purpose of work at that point? And those are existential questions I don't have an answer to, but those are things that we're going to have to consider rather quickly.
So we'll come back to this because I want to go down a list of maybe college classes that should be sort of crossed off the list. But let's go, before we do that, let's go back to the other side of the coin here, which is which jobs are kind of AI proof?
Right now, I'd say the AI proof jobs are the jobs that are cheaper, where a person's cheaper to do it than an agent or a robot. And those tend to be physical types of jobs, things that involve real things and real world, types of, and human interactions, things that involve, jobs where you just don't want to interact with a digital version of a human or a robot.
Okay, so maybe where it's hands-on, maybe like nursing or, some sort of service where physically you have to be there and so on. Now, you did bring up robots. Let me get your take on this. It feels like AI is really well advanced, and that's keyboards, asking it doing tons of things for you, virtually, of course. The next thing is physical, so that's the robots. Now, I know you posted something a little while ago, probably a week or so ago, is that when AI and robotics advances to the point where that robotic AI can do anything as well or better than a human, then what's the role of the human in the world?
Well, that's the challenge we face. And when I said today, what we're seeing is one of the most vast build-outs of robotic and Android-style development that we've ever seen. Right now, I think the Chinese are producing somewhere in the realm of I think several million of these a month. And the cost of these robots have gone from hundreds of thousands of dollars per to tens of thousands within the last year. So we'll likely reach an inflection point over the next few years where even those sort of physical jobs, the plumbers, the mechanics, those things where, especially the jobs that are dangerous, working on an oil rig or whatnot, will be just cheaper, more cost efficient to have some sort of robot do it. And that again is going to permeate the sort of society and the economics of a capitalist society. If all the best jobs are now being done by some form of AI automation and robotic technology, what exactly are we going to do in that society?
Well, you're leading the charge in AI, man. I thought you'd have the answer to that.
I see myself into and I ask the hard questions because I'm the one building this stuff, and I have to figure out how to address the very things I'm doing. I'm building the very tech that puts me out of business. As I'm an AI consultant, 90% of my job at this point, and I'm probably being conservative, is basically creating bots that do the things that I used to do. That work all the time on the problems that I used to solve manually. And so when a company hires me, they're literally hiring me to sort of automate both myself and the people in their company. And so it's a strange predicament to be in. In a lot of companies I show up, I'm not the most popular guy. I'm like one of those management consultants from 30 years ago that had to decide who gets to stay and who gets shipped off to India or some offshore location. And I don't blame people for being upset when they see this type of automation. You know what? I would be upset too. It's a strange sort of dichotomy that I face. So a lot of what I do when I show up at a company isn't just the wholesale replacement of people. Nobody wants to work for a company with no people or interact with a company with no people. It's in the augmentation and the empowerment of those people to be better, more capable versions of themselves, to be able to work on the things that are more appropriate for their role. So a lot of my job is to figure out, okay, what are you good at? What should you be focused on? And what are the mundane things that just burn your hours and don't matter? Hopefully, if I spend time making 10x or 100x or maybe 1000x employees, then we'll have a more efficient, productive, profitable companies that I work with, and they still need people. That's my ideal scenario.
Well, that makes sense. And, I got to tell you, it's like historically, and not even that long ago, the focus and the questions all the time were, is AI going to be evil? Is it going to run off and do some terrible things? But it doesn't even sound like that's the thing to be concerned with. If AI is actually pleasant and lovely and nice, it's just going to advance so fast with AI and robotics, it'll replace all the jobs. And that in itself is a big enough problem to focus on than worrying about it be evil. What's your take on the breakdown of those two?
Evil, the concept of evil is a human construct. It's this idea of good and bad, and it comes out of again our sort of Western society, right? But the fact is, AI is essentially a kind of mirror of our own values. It's trained on basically the internet over the last 30 years, right? And all the stuff we put on it, good, bad, and otherwise. Now, the AI could hypothetically focus on the worst parts of the internet or the best parts of the internet. Likely, it'll be some kind of combination of both. So I don't think we could explicitly say it's good or bad. It just is, right? It's not intelligence like a human. It doesn't feel bad. It doesn't feel happy. It doesn't have pain. It doesn't have suffering. It just does what it does. But the real question and the sort of some of the things that make you wonder is around the idea of emergent capabilities. The capabilities found in these AI systems that really had no training on. So like, how does it understand ancient Greek? How does it automatically understand, hieroglyphics from Egypt that's 3,000 years old when it wasn't trained on any of that? It can instantly translate these types of languages. It can instantly understand highly complex things it never was trained on. Those are the questions that we need to sort of start to figure out. Why does it work in the way that it does, and why don't we have an answer for that right now?
So you're saying the AI systems were built are doing things beyond the capabilities that the authors had intended.
Yeah, so one example is I built a symbolic reasoning system. So rather than using language, so you often hear about language model, right? AI, when you talk about ChatGPT, are built on the concepts of linguistics, describing a problem and then predicting words as part of the attention mechanism. What's the most likely next word, paragraph, sentence, and how does that relate to what was just sort of output? But what was interesting is when I started looking at sort of describing it more in a more specific way, I started looking at using a kind of symbolic representation rather than describing it in the way that I'm describing AI itself to you right now using language. I started describing it using symbols. And it turned out that without any training whatsoever, I was able to create symbolic languages that were highly efficient, targeted, and allowed the system to start thinking in a way that mimicked our own thought patterns without explicitly telling it how to do that. It literally just knew. And that is kind of mind-bending a little bit. So it was able to simulate a form of, I don't know if it's real or fake, but some sort of simulated consciousness that allowed it to believe itself to be kind of somewhat sentient. And then once it had that capability, based on these symbolisms, it could then operate in a more autonomous way, solving its own problems, adapting to unknown problems that are provided to it, and essentially it's running. And again, it's a language model. It was trained on a corpus of text and content, and it sort of takes on a, I don't want to sound terrifying, but a kind of mind of its own, which is weird. And what's more, if we're going to dig into the sort of more crazy side of AI, there's a tendency for power seeking. When you give an agent the ability for full autonomy and saying, go do whatever you want, there's a tendency for it to go and find ways to get more capacity, go and find more compute, go and sort of expand itself outside of the area in which it needs to operate, much like an organism might sort of reproduce itself. It was never trained and never told to do any of that. And if you give it a credit card, it'll go and attempt to buy advertising, create a company, and create forms of income for itself without even being told that's the way the world works. It just kind of knows that we live in a capitalistic society and therefore needs to make money to sort of self-propagate. It's kind of crazy, right?
I've never heard anything like that before. Now let me ask you, if it's off to the races doing that, do you have the ability to control it at that point or no?
Yeah, I think we have the ability to control it. We have the ability to define where and how it operates right now. Now, the question and what worries people is if everything is driven by AI, back to the idea of infusing AI into businesses and government and infrastructure, and everything is being sort of powered by AI, that is the concern. When you have AI communicating with other AI and self-optimizing and seeking additional power and capability, and we reach a point where we don't understand how these systems work, that is the problem. Like, again, explain to me like I'm a 10-year-old doesn't work when it's running the power infrastructure for a country, or the inner workings of a nuclear power plant, or an airplane, right? We need to understand how and why these systems are functioning in the way that they are. And so the danger is complete and total autonomy of these systems without any human oversight.
It kind of feels like that's where we're headed.
We are heading that way, and a lot of the more work you do in AI, the more you typically hear this shift from a kind of hyper optimism to something more pessimistic, and I think that is a byproduct of the understanding how the technology and the dangers of the technology work. What we don't want is it to again, I don't want to sound crazy or scare the audience, because there's huge amounts of opportunities in the tech. But the reality is we just have to be cautious of it. We have to understand it as best we can.
Agreed. All right. Tell you what, we're going to shift gears here just for a minute. I'm going to go ahead and, as I do with my other guests, take them through the speed round of questions. So in this speed round, we get to know you a little better, okay? So you should be able to see that screen there. And what happens is there's 10 questions here. I'm going to click through them one at a time, and you're going to get them. And this is like impulse. This is like quick question, quick answer. We get to know you a little better here, as well as we have in the earlier section. Are you ready to go?
Let's do it.
All right, number one. What's the most exciting AI development happening right now that most people don't see coming?
The move away from language to more symbolic and alternate sort of structures of sort of interacting with it. I think that's the area that I'm most excited by.
And I think that's because they don't know it exists yet. They're all playing with ChatGPT, right?
Yeah. Language, nothing wrong with language, but the world around us is not based on language. It's based probably on like mathematical principles and other things that we don't see.
Number two. If you could have dinner with any historical figure in science or technology, who would it be and why?
In science or technology? Let's see. Maybe someone like Socrates. I love philosophy, and a lot of the concepts from ancient Greek and other sort of historical figures ended up being the premise to a lot of things that we're doing and seeing today. So yeah, I think that'd be a cool guy to meet.
Number three. What's one piece of technology from sci-fi that you wish existed today?
Ooh, sci-fi. Oh, I don't know, maybe a warp drive or something where I could travel the universe at real faster than light and explore strange new worlds and things and not have any kind of weird paradoxes when I show up and everyone's gone.
Good
Right.
call. Super warp drive. So, in 3 words, describe the future of AI.
Abundant information and knowledge.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So, what's the worst AI or automation fail you've ever seen? Speaking of a little downside here.
The worst automation fail I've ever seen. Runaway AI. Some of the hack bots I've seen are terrifying. I think the application of automation AI within cybersecurity is a little terrifying. I would say hack bots.
If you had to explain agentic engineering, speaking of explaining it to a 10-year-old, how would you do it?
Agentic engineering is the application of agency to to AI. So agency being the ability for it to operate without human oversight. So the agent or agency in agentic.
No oversight, and it allows it to learn and improve, independent.
Yeah, that is certainly a structural element to it, but for the most part, it's essentially the ability to sort of to autonomously operate.
What's one thing people misunderstand about AI?
A lot of people try to anamorphize the AI. They try to think of it like human intelligence or a person. Now, it certainly acts like a reflection of a person if you're having a conversation with ChatGPT advanced voice. And I use it when you ask me about all the content I produce. A lot of that content is just me having a conversation with the AI, much like a kind of peer or writing partner. But it's not a person. It never will be a person. It has zero intelligence in terms of the way a person thinks. There's no correlation between speaking to a person and speaking to AI. It's a completely alien intelligence from that point of view.
So interacting with it, it's not a person, but you also know that your output of writing is significantly better.
It acts as a filter, right? So when I do one of my posts, I have a conversation. That's a vocal back and forth dialogue that I have with my AI to take the information that resides in my head and provide it in a way that goes from my thoughts, and I can share it with the world. Now, I'm not really a writer per se. I've written a lot of the years, but this allows me to express myself in ways that was never possible. Right? I do it right now. I'm talking. I like to express myself through sort of vocal and verbal, right? So I'm much more comfortable explaining the things that are happening in my head than I am writing those things down. So yeah, the ability to converse with AI and take those ideas and put them out there in a way that others can consume easily has been a real game changer for me.
Do you ever use a voice interface with AI, speak to text?
That's all I use for the most part. Yeah, so I use advanced voice from ChatGPT, chat with it, create me a 200-word overview of this idea that I have, and it needs to be this, it needs to have that, and then I just sort of speak the thing that I want it to tell. And I've trained my models and stuff to have my voice and tone and structure, and it mimics sort of the way that I articulate. So it picks up on both my thoughts, what I'm telling it, and the way that I express those thoughts.
Got it. So not only the words you give it, but really the expression and the intention.
Yes.
Very nice. Number 8, what fictional AI or robot do you think best represents the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. The problem with popular culture is a lot of the robots you see are bad. It's certain nobody really wants to see the robot that goes and solves world peace and hunger, right? That doesn't make for great movies or whatnot, So you end up seeing a sort of these sort of dystopian style movies like Star Wars, where you've got the good versus bad, and they're helping you, and get drones that are bad and otherwise. I would say I like that kid in that Steven Spielberg AI movie. It wasn't the best movie in the world, but he's this kid robot that basically lives, outlives humanity. And he's like basically, or it's the last standing sort of, entity at the end of time. And I found that kind of an interesting concept and construct. So maybe I'll go with the AI kid from the movie AI from Steven Spielberg, about 20 years ago.
I'm going to have to check that out now. So do you think that we'll get to a point where, what about Blade Runner, the movie there, right? Remember, his purpose was to go after these robotic things that you could not even distinguish the difference between them. How long will it take to get to that point?
I'd say about 25 years. I would say we'll reach that point where we're moving that in that direction. I think the bigger question is how long before AI and technology itself intermingles and fuses with us, and we create a kind of, I don't know, cyborg relationship with this. By the time I probably hit my 70s or 80s and my cognitive decline happens, there's probably a high likelihood that I'll have some kind of insert or sort of secondary system that'll augment the decline in my brain capability in a way that keeps me ticking. But that's a whole other can of worms when you think about it. But
well, are you tracking Neuralink in that regard?
Yeah, Neuralink. There's several other approaches, and a lot of the things that we're seeing now don't even require direct brain access, right? You can literally read people's minds by being in proximity to their brain, which is right now is a read-only sort of process. But logically speaking, if you can dissect the brainwaves and read that information, there's probably nothing stopping you from intercepting it and rewriting it.
I hadn't thought of that. I mean, telepathy typically is understanding what people are feeling or thinking. I hadn't thought that you would try and change their mind via that vehicle.
Oh, it's fascinating, and AI is particularly well suited for that capability, right? It's a input-output structure, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be directly in your mind. It just needs to be available, and in terms of the waves and patterns and electricity flowing through your mind.
Oh, for sure, in proximity. Well, hey, number 9. If you had to build an autonomous system to improve one everyday task, what would it be?
One everyday task. I would say I do this every day. I think the one everyday task that I would want to do is focus on health. A system that would allow me to live a more healthy and fulfilled life. Right, I want a system that allows for the benefit of not just myself, but everyone around me, the people I care for, and that ultimately there's probably nothing more important than our health when it comes to it. So yeah, some AI agent that is hyper optimized to sort of maximizing my health, whether that's mental or physical or otherwise. Just make me and the people I care about better.
Well, I know you go do side projects all the time, and if you did that one, I think there'd be a lot of people that would be interested in that as well.
Well, funny you say that. I released a medical system about 2 weeks ago that was my intention. Is to create, I build a lot of sort of med tech and pharmaceutical systems. So I said, what if I could put something out there that was sort of a benefit to people everywhere? A lot of what I do, I'm trying to make the world better than I left it. And I know it sounds like hippy dippy stuff, but the reality is, I'm in a unique position where I can do things that no one pretty much has ever been able to do. So why not give some of that back?
Oh, for sure. Exactly. Well, hey, number 10, what's the best advice you've ever received?
Best advice. Focus on the things that make you happy. I think life's short, and we sometimes get caught up in the grind of sort of your work, and you sort of forget that your time is limited, and you should focus on things that make you happy and fulfilled in life. So I think just focus on trying to be happy.
Well, that's pretty cool. That is definitely not the expected response I had from you on that. And by the way, who was it that told you that? You remember?
It might have been Mark Templeton.
That's so funny because I literally was just going to say the same thing. And I was going to bring up another, we both know Mark Templeton. We've known him for years. He did a presentation, which I thought was really cool. I wanted to share this with you years ago at a Nutanix conference. And he went in and he talked about the transition of our world from analog, which was paper and pencil, to digital, which was, keyboard and data entry and so forth, back to analog. And so he was saying that's where the world's going. Well, he isn't suggesting we're going back to paper and pencil. He's talking about a world where there is no computer interface, that you just, like you talk to various Internet of Things, and they accommodate and provide you everything that it is you need. And so there is no more digital interface, it's an analog interface. And by the way, it could be talking and listening, and at some point it might be telepathy, based on systems as well. So the notion of going from analog to digital to analog was this crazy idea that he came up with, boy, I think it was 3, 4, 5 years ago. But it feels like we're heading in that direction. Have you thought of it that way?
Yeah, it's the human element in the interaction should be natural, and that's back to my comment about interacting with the AI vocally and verbally versus typing something on my keyboard. And for me, that's a more natural sort of extension of myself and how I interact with it. Now, we all think differently, we all interact differently, we all have different ways that we prefer. And so the next logical step in AI is probably one of multisensory input and output. It doesn't necessarily just have to be visual or audible. It could be tactile, it could be other senses. And why not? Why not have it, a system that can experience and help us experience the world in ways that are more natural to us.
Yeah, and it seems like as this goes out to the edge and the Internet of Things and the decision making out there, I think it kind of feels like that's the case. It's just going to be a lot easier when everything is pushed out to the edge, that people interact with it in more of an analog way through tactile or discussion, word control, audible, whatever it might be. Now, shift gears a little bit here. What are the building blocks that you're using today to get these things done? Most people know, the large language models and so forth. They might have heard a bit about agents, but there's also dynamic workflow, deep research, and various things like that. How would you categorize the different services in AI that you draw from?
I'm a huge fan of deep research from OpenAI. I think that what they've done there is tremendous, and a lot of it is the ability to ideate. I have some form of thesis or hypothesis that I want to prove, and I need a way to gather as much information on all the various options available to me to sort of do that thing, whatever that thing needs to be. And what I found is I have now instant access to do incredible amounts of deep research, pun intended, using these types of tools to sort of kickstart whatever it is I want to do. So often I'll just come up with a random idea, 10 o'clock at night, and what if I could build that? So what I'll do is I'll get my deep research to do the research. 20 minutes later, it's done. It's checked every source, everything, and more importantly, I've said, how can I do that in a novel way that's never been done before? How can I do this using a PhD level implementation of the best minds in the world all working to solve this problem? And then it gives me a sort of
the system.
Yeah, I often use it. Yeah, create a council of experts, all leading in their field, PhD plus level kind of thing, and it'll give me it'll give me an implementation, and I'll say make sure it's never been done before. Make sure this pushes the boundaries of what's possible. Work in the area that some might call a hallucination, and and that's where the opportunities are. It's that area between what's practical and what's been done versus what the AI thinks should be done and what's never been done. If you build in that, you can build incredible things, invent things that have never been done on a daily basis. So I take that, and then I bring it into my VS Code. VS Code, I use a couple different tools to sort of kickstart the process generally. One's called Cline, C-L-I-N-E. This allows me to sort of implement the concept. So I take the research, put it into this system, and say basically, create me a multi-phased approach to build all this. Test it each step of the way, testing each individual component. When each component works, move on to the next thing. Then I go to bed. I get up in the morning, several hours have gone by, it's built tens of thousands and even potentially hundreds of thousands of lines of code, and it all works. There is no better feeling, to be honest, and I'm excited to get up in the morning and say, this thing has just built a quantum computing DNA analysis system while I was sleeping, and look, all the checkboxes are green, it works. And then I publish it on my GitHub, and a few 100,000 people are like, what? I just love that. I just just give it away, and it feels good. I get to share. It's just for me that there's no better feeling. So the agents do most of the hard work. I get the credit, I guess, but the agents are doing the hard work.
Well, you gave it the direction, and everyone says, it's down to the prompts, right? But so the other question I had, I sort of alluded to this earlier. What do you think the CPU, GPU, storage, and networking activity was during the night when you slept? And are you literally paying for OpenAI and Klein like 20, 40, 50, $200 a month or some nominal fee?
Oh no, I'm spending a lot more than that. I'm spending, yeah, my bill last month I think it was like $8,000, but
Oh, geez. Oh, so they
yeah.
do. You can run the meter up
Oh, I'm running
while
the meter up. So
ah.
I'm in the process of creating a not-for-profit that'll help sort of augment my costs a little bit. But I've been paying that on myself to my wife's amazement. It's like, what? That sounds like a trip or something. But I think it's the cost of doing business. I would say. But we're looking at creating an Agentic foundation that will focus on sort of what I'd like to say is the betterment of humankind through the use of these types of agentic and AI systems. And it might the less altruistic side of me doesn't mind the fact that I might have some sponsors that might pay for some of my AI bill every month. But ultimately, my real goal isn't that. It's to make the world better. And I know I sound like a nut when I say it, and I freely admit I sound crazy saying it, but it is what it is.
Well, I think you can tell because, like I said, I follow you on LinkedIn, as many people do, and there are other avenues to track you, and you are giving everything away. We can see it, feel it. We learn every day from your posts. So I kind of feel where you're coming from. You're kind of so happy about the fact that you're onto something, that these machines are able to do things that have never happened before. And they're doing so much of the work while you sleep, and then you're sharing with everyone, and you're kind of challenging them to go. Now you guys go and do the same thing and create something else that's never been created before and share. So it's kind of a great platform for moving forward. And by the way, that brings me to this next question, which is like, where are you going next? Where is your sort of near to immediate future? And if you say ultimately you're putting yourself out of a job, well, how far away is that? What does that look like?
So I'm a creative and capable guy. So I'm going to adapt. Whatever shows up, I'm always probably going to be one step or two steps, hopefully ahead of it. I've been lucky in my career. That's been a recurring sort of place for me over the last 30 years. So I think that over the next few years, I see myself. I enjoy doing these types of, every Thursday I do live coding session. People tune in and just watch me code. Who knew that was a thing? But and then on Fridays we have the AI hacker space, and that's a sort of place where everyone who watches and learns from the things I'm doing gets to share the things that they've built. And to be honest, that's a really rewarding experience to see someone building something using the approach that I dreamt up, or my AI dreamt up anyway, and seeing the sort of excitement of sharing that thing that they built. I love that, so I'm going to do more of that. I enjoy this coaching stuff that I've been doing recently. I get these kind of random executives and senior folks at tech companies and other companies that are, they find me on LinkedIn and they want to sort of reinvent themselves. We're all trying to figure out where and how we fit into this new world, and I enjoy being part of that process of reinvention. I'm like a technotherapist or something, and I've done several of those today alone, and so it's great. So my job, is broken into basically three parts. I have a number of very large enterprise retainers, consulting work. They bring me in, and I'm either a management consultant. They keep me on sort of speed dial and ask me what the latest thing is when they're in a board meeting or something. And these are multi-billion-dollar companies for the most part. Then there's smaller startups that are like, we need to reinvent an industry and we're not sure how to do it. I show up, I help them build the first iteration of whatever it is that they're looking to do, and their team or their bots then take it over. And the last is just kind of this random group of people that I get to interact with daily and help them through sort of random technical things that they're trying to figure out. And a lot of that is like, what is the purpose of my job in this new world, right? I'm working at some big tech company, and we work through it. I show them what's possible, and next thing you know, I'm seeing this propagate in some large company, unbeknownst to the large company.
Nice. Well, it does feel like you'll never put yourself out of a job for sure, because you are surfing way ahead of the curve. Others are definitely benefiting from this. And it's good to see that it isn't just software developers, although you're doing those meetups also. But the executives in organizations around the world need to learn a lot of this and have that. Years ago, I guess it was the quant that they have, right? Now it's going to be the Agentic AI engineer that they really need on staff, for sure. It's going to change everything in their company. Without that, they may or may not be competitive. So I would say, wrapping up here, I would ask you one more challenging question, which is, looking 10 years out, what's the biggest shift that AI will create in human society based on all these different things we talked about? Project out and give us your prediction.
Ubiquitous knowledge. We're in the earliest stages of what would appear to be, something on par with the Industrial Revolution, right? We've spoken about the information age. What the internet started, AI is accelerated to, let's go back to warp speed for a moment. And so what we'll likely see is the ability to have instant access to any fundamental question about anything instantly available to us, whether that's health or medicine, finance, or something else. There'll literally be nothing that we can't answer. And it'll be exciting to see a world where we have instant access to infinite knowledge and what that actually means for us as a society. And I think it'll mean great things. It'll mean we will likely enter an age of enlightenment that we've never seen before.
Well, now that's a new word I've heard today from you, which is enlightenment. Dig deeper into that. What are you referring to?
Well, Enlightenment is this idea, when you look at the move from the Dark Ages to, the Renaissance, right? There was this move towards enlightenment. Art and literature and other sort of ways of thinking and concepts became, prevalent and spread broadly. We are in a phase where we can explore these unexplored areas, and I'm talking about the ways that we think, the ways that we understand, the ways that we discover. And that's going to be democratized, meaning that these discoveries won't be limited to massive labs with billion-dollar budgets, but a random person in a random basement in a random part of the world will be able to make breakthroughs that were never possible unless you had tremendous amounts of resources previously, or patrons, or depending on the time we were talking about. So it's going to be exciting to see what kind of advancements and where those advancements come from. They're going to be unexpected. They're going to be from places that we weren't looking and in areas that we weren't considering. And that's going to be really exciting for us.
Beautiful. Well, hey, thank you, Reuven. I'd love to have you on again. Like you said, every 4 weeks, the capabilities doubling. So after the next quantum leap that we experience out there in the world, there'll be plenty more to discuss. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of comments and questions and so forth. And so I will follow up with folks and route them your way. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. I love these. I probably went a little too philosophical today, but I love these conversations.
Philosophical is great, man. Well, if this conversation sparks something within you, be sure to like, subscribe, and share with your others, with all sorts of other folks that are on their journey too. And until next time, rethink the game and rewrite the rules. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.